I wanted to do a bonus video on the C programming series. Last week we learned about functions, and in the programming guide for that section we talked about some of the standard C library functions. And from standard lib, one of the functions was rand, and that'll generate a random number. And a couple people asked, how do you use that random number generator? Maybe you want to write a game that needs random numbers, like you're going to do a Dungeons and Dragons type game. You need to have a 20-sided die. How do you use that random number generator to pick those random numbers? So I want to do a quick sort of bonus video to talk about that. Now I don't have anything started here in this directory, so let's go ahead and write a new program. We'll call it rand test.c. And if you remember the way that we write our programs, we always start with the include standard IO. And the random number generator, rand, is defined in include standard lib, so I need to have that. And then our main function, int main. And I need to have a loop variable here, so we'll do an integer of, we'll call it iter for iteration. And we'll do another one. We're going to actually store the random numbers that we're going to grab, and that's going to be, we'll call it value. Now, before we use the random number generator, we always need to seed it, right? So seed the random number generator. And we do that with srand. Now, the best way to do this is to seed the random number generator with the system time. We haven't learned how to do that yet, so we're just going to pick a number out of the air. 1, 2, 3, 5, 5. We'll pick that number. And now let's go ahead and generate some random numbers. So loop through and generate random numbers. So we'll do a for loop for that, and we'll start the iteration at 0 as long as iter is less than 20. So that means it's going to go from 0 to 19. And then every time we're going to iterate the iteration value by 1. And all we're going to do is just store the random number generator, random number value. So random value is rand. I'm going to do, let's go ahead and print it back to the screen. Printf, and I'm just going to print the number itself. %d, and there's our new line, and then random value. And that's all I'm going to do. And then return 0. So before I save this and compile it, let's remind ourselves what we're doing. So we've got an iteration variable. We've got a variable that's going to store our random number. Before you use the random number generator, you really should seed it with the number. So we're doing srand here. We've picked one static number. I picked out of the air, but we'll see in a second what that means. And then we're going to do a loop here. So I'm doing a for loop. I'm just going to pick 20 random numbers, 0 to 19, because my iteration variable goes from 0 and as long as it's less than 20. And then every time I do the loop, I'm going to pick a random number using rand, and I'm going to print that back to the screen. And then when I'm done, I'm going to just return back to the system. Let's go ahead and save and quit. And let's go ahead and compile that. The i16 GCC. Remember, we need to turn on all warnings. Uppercase W, all. We'll turn on all warnings. We're going to save this as output of randtest.exe, and we're going to compile randtest.c. And if I didn't make any errors in my program, I should just get back my prompt. And now we can run rand test. And so it's picked 20 random numbers. Now we're always, every time this program runs, it's going to always use the same seed, because that's hard coded in my program. I actually picked that number, what was it, 1, 2, 3, 5, 5. And so the random number list will always be the same. I'll run it again one second here. You can see that the first number is 26,167. Run rand test again. You're getting 26,167. You can see the last 3 numbers are definitely the same, because you can see the previous run as well. Now that's going to give me random numbers all the time between 0 and rand max, and that's why these numbers are so big. Let's go back into that rand test program. Okay, so this down here, this was giving us values between 0 and rand max, right? But what if I don't want it to be between 0 and rand max? What if I want it to be between 0 and some other number? So again, if I'm going to be writing a program that requires throwing a 20-sided die for like a Dungeons and Dragons type game, I want this to go between 0 and 19. Right? If I add 1, it goes between 1 and 20. And so how do you do that? There's a couple different ways, but the an easy way to do that, something a lot of people do, is they'll do a modulo by 20. Because what does that do, right? Remember, we've done this before with modulo. Rand will give me a random number, and then modulo 20 will divide that number by 20, but give me the remainder. So if the random number happens to be 20, it's 20 divided by 20, remainder of 0, so I'll get 0. If it's 21, it's going to be 1 with a remainder of 1. This is an easy way to get numbers between 0 and 19. We're doing that modulo. And that's all we're going to do. Just that'll give us numbers between 0 and 20. We'll go ahead and save and quit. Let's go ahead and recompile that. Just use my previous command line. If I didn't do anything wrong, I should get my prompt back, and we'll go ahead and run rand test. And now I should get 20 random numbers that are each between 0 and 19. Right, and there you go. And I can, now that I know how big that's going to be, I could add 1 to it, and I could get between 1 and 20, whatever I need to do. Now, how do we know how good this random number generator is? Well, we're going to learn in the next video here about how to do arrays. But let's do a quick preview into arrays. We'll do a rand test. Now, if you haven't gotten to this part in the series yet, this will be a little confusing, but it'll make sense when you've seen that part of the video series. I'm going to define a static array here of we'll call it hist, because it's a histogram basically. And we're going to define this of size 20. We're going to have 20 elements to that array that go from 0 to 19. Conveniently, exactly what I'm getting out of the random number. So before I use that, I really want to make sure that I've zeroed out the array. I want to make sure that the array has nothing in it but zeros. Some implementations will guarantee that that's always 0 when you define an array. I prefer to play it safe, and I always like to make sure that it's 0 before I use it. So let's do another for loop here. Iter is 0. Iter is less than 20, right? Because it's how big my array is. I'm going to go from 0 to 19, and then iterate the iteration variable. Now again, we haven't covered arrays yet. That's on the next video element, but this is a preview into that. We're going to go ahead and set that element of the array, iter, to 0. That's all we need to do. Is that's our name of the array, and then this is the element of the array. They always start at 0. I have 20 elements defined in there, right? So that means it's going to go from 0 to 19, and that's exactly what I've got up here in my for loop. This is going from 0 to 19, counting 1. And let's go ahead and replace this printf with a we're going to increment the that element of the array, which I don't want to do iter in this case. I actually want to do random value, because that's what I've picked. Right up here, I've picked a number between 0 and 19, and so I want to store that up here. Random value plus 1, right? That's all I'm going to do is just iterate that by 1. And before I forget, I want to run this a whole bunch of times, more than just 20. Let's make this, let's make it 2000. And now that I've done that, let's go ahead and print the histogram. Oops, histogram. And so let's go ahead and do another for loop. Iter equals 0. Iter is less than 20 because that's how many elements I have in my array. And then iter equals iter plus 1. Again, we have not covered arrays yet in the series. That's next week. But here you go. This is the, we're going to just do a printf, print out a %d because that'll give me an integer. Or, oop, we actually, rather than doing that, let's actually say the element of that array is, and then what the count is. There we go. That's what I want to do. And so I want to do my iteration variable and then the value of that element of the array, just iter. And there we go. So let's, before I compile this, just to remind ourselves what we've done. Just like we did before, we've got a variable to iterate with. We got another variable that's going to store random numbers. All I've added here is a static array of 20 elements. That's going to go from 0 to 19. Before I use it, I make sure that I loop through that and zero out every element in that array. Here I've seeded the random number generator. I'm going to go 2,000 times. And I'm going to pick a random number every time. And that random number is going to be between 0 and 19 because I'm using modulo 20. And then it's going to increment that element of the array by 1. So if I get that random number modulo 20 ends up being 1, then the hist1 will be hist1 plus 1. And so that way I can sort of count how many times I'm getting back numbers between 0 and 19. And at the end, all I'm doing is just printing out what those values are in the array. Let's go ahead and do a save and quit, and we're going to compile one more time. And with a well-done random number generator, you should, after running this 2,000 times, I should get counts in each of those elements of the histogram array going from 0 to 19. I should get counts that are about the same. They won't be the same, but they should be pretty close to the same. So let's go ahead and actually see if that's what we get. Rand test. And you can see here, I've got numbers that are all floating around 90 and 100 and something. So they're all pretty close. So if you want to generate random numbers between 0 and 19, or you can change the modulo to get a different size range, that's one way that you can do that. So I just wanted to show that as a way that you could use the rand function to get numbers between any range that you wanted to have. There's other ways to do it, but modulo is a very easy way to do that. Before I close out, I just want to remind you, this channel is definitely supported by Patreon supporters, and I thank every one of you who's supporting me on Patreon. Some of you have contributed at a higher level, and I want to recognize you here, so thank you very much. And that's it for this week's video. What other topics would you like me to cover? Let me know in the comments below. Visit our website at freedos.org. Join us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you.